Hi everyone, and welcome back to Balkansis, the show that's going to help you navigate the massive challenges of life, motherhood, culture, identity, and belonging with more ease, acceptance, joy, and purpose. Thanks to each and every one of you that come back every time to listen, learn, heal, and feel inspired. If you do love the podcast, then do me a huge favour and hit the subscribe button. It really does help spread the word.
Oh, we're on. Yes, I'm so excited. Welcome back, everybody, to another fabulous episode of Balkan Sis. I'm so happy to have this special guest on board today. Her name is Debra Gavranich, and she is a fellow Australian author, a fabulous mother. She's so many things to so many different people, but to me, she's quite amazing, and her family story is very fascinating. So I thought I have to have her on. We did meet in person, and we actually met through a Croatian genealogy group on Facebook, which was quite random because I'm not very active on there. I only read things on there. That's about it. I don't comment much. So when I saw the book title, The Girl Who Left, it just got my attention, and I had to comment. So that's where we struck up a little relationship in Messenger. And I want to introduce Deborah today. So can you say hi, Deborah, and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Ivana. I'm very excited to be on your podcast. I'm totally impressed by you, Ivana. I'm a bit of a fan, having met you and followed your story for a little bit, and I'm just feel very honoured to be on this podcast. I'm I've just turned I've just turned 62, and I live in Cairns. I'm from Cairns. I'm a first generation Australian. My parents were Croatian. They were both from the island of Korčula in Croatia. They're from the village of Blato. And I was born here, but I'm very fiercely proud of my heritage as well. I'm a physio. I work as a physio in Cairns, and I've written this book. And this is how Ivana and I met, through The Girl Who Left, which she will talk a little bit about, I guess.
Oh, definitely. I'm inspired. It's like I'm fangirling like you. So I'm like, someone's a fan of me. Like, that's so weird and random. But thank you. I'm trying to get better at accepting compliments. I think it's a woman thing when someone tells me something nice.
Accept it. Ivana, I have to just tell this little story because Ivana did meet me on this Facebook group. I was told through a friend of a friend of a friend to advertise my book on this Facebook group. And Ivana messaged me. And not only did she messenger me, she sent me little video clips of herself talking to me, about 3 of them. And I hope you don't mind, Ivana, but I showed a lot of people those video clips because you just you you just won my heart in those clips. Just you were just so beautiful and good and loving, and I just knew I had to meet you. So I'm really pleased that we eventually met. I think it was last month in the Gold Coast, and it's lovely. And
As well, 'cause we just hit it off. We never seen each other before. We come to this resort. We're like, "Hey, how you been?" We order a coffee and we sit down, and it's like we've like known each
I
other.
felt like I've known you for years, Ivana, and you're sort of a little bit older than my children, but it's like a surrogate daughter or a friend. I just felt like we had this connection. Yeah, it was just lovely to meet you.
I think it's awesome, and I think that it's like we've all woven from the same cloth, and somehow we're all connected, even though we come from so many different lands and cities and places and our different lived experiences. It's like, and then you've got that common thread of the thing that makes you you, and your roots and your heritage. And I think I just love that element. Like, I think I leave all the other bad stuff behind, and I just take on the good bits, that were given to me by my grandparents and my parents, and same for you. And that's what this book is like. Everyone knows that I've been wanting to write a book for ages. And after seeing you, I thought, oh my God, Deborah did it. I can do it. Like,
Do it. Anyone can do it. I've never written anything before, Ivana. I just had this passion, this burning passion to write it. and I did, and I'm just blown away by the success of it. And Ivana's story, from what I've gathered, really needs to be told, and I'm really behind her 100% of the way. And any way I can help you, Ivana, to get your story out there as well is so important.
Honestly, having you in my corner, like just as someone and I think it's so nice to have someone who's like not in your immediate circle, like family. Sometimes you think, are they just telling me that to make me feel less of a way? And then when you actually have a stranger or someone you've just met that feels like family and feels like home, you think, well, damn, if they believe in me, like I can do it. So
And I think it's important for so many people out there to hear your story because you've got a story to tell, Ivana.
and so do you. And that's why we're here today. Today's all going to be about you. Honestly, this book I'm going to show it to people. It's called The Girl Who Led from Croatia to the Cane Fields. It's a true story. And this is about your mum, your family, your history, your roots, about it. It's about so many things. I don't even know how to put this book into words. And this is why I encourage people to buy it, get online, buy it, go to your nearest bookstore. There's also an audiobook coming. There's so many wonderful promotions you've been doing. And I'm not a huge reader. Like I will say to people, I only read things I'm genuinely interested in. I'm not someone who just reads for leisure, like to relax. I definitely have to read, and it has to be something that I can take away and apply to my own life. Has to be some sort of common interest, I guess. So when I read, it's to read with a purpose. And this book, honestly, for me, I could have read it in one night. Like I had to pace it because I knew once I read it, that was it. So I read it and I reread it and I was pondering over it. I was marking chapters. I was moved. I was crying. Like I went through so many different emotions. And I just thought, wow, this woman can bloody write. Like, I am a parent. I was going to say, the F word. I'm like, if I'll be decent today. So I'm going to obviously post the book in my show notes, the links on where to buy it. But first off, we're going to start off with so the first few pages, you open up the book, but basically you wrote in the book on the first page, my mother was a constant in my life, a rock, my best friend. Losing her when I was 35 years of age with 3 young children under 5 was unbearably painful. The first few years were so difficult. Even now, years later, I cry when I speak of her. I listen to my friends with envy when they talk about the close connection their children have with their grandparents. I feel the hole in my life and sad that my children never knew her. This story is for them. From the first time I visited Blatov as a 22-year-old, I felt the connection to the village, to the country my parents came from. Oh, I'm getting choked up. Like a boomerang, I keep returning, loving it more with each visit. Maybe in my heart, Croatia makes me feel closer to my parents. I'm lucky that my parents were good people. Life was not always easy, but they worked hard, had kind hearts, and they loved each other. For this, I am grateful. This book is a historical account of my mother's life and told through her eyes. She was born in Blato on the island of Korčula in Croatia. At the time, Croatia was a part of a union or federation of states called Yugoslavia. So there will be references to the former Yugoslavia throughout the story when the political entity was still in existence. While I have endeavored to keep it factual, some names have been changed and certain events and scenes have been compressed, expanded, or changed to fulfill the needs of the story. Some of the conversations and encounters have been approximated and some are correct according to the people who kindly shared their memories with me. Oh, it's like, wow, I have goosebumps. Like,
You that especially the first part of that, the author's note, my husband calls it the litmus test. He said if people can get through that without tearing up, they're pretty strong.
oh, your husband honestly seems like a great man because that is just like an introduction to where it's going to head, where it's going to go. And I guess I wasn't reading the book with any sort of inhibitions or any sort of expectations. I was just letting it lead me wherever it needed to go. And you did such a wonderful way in guiding people through the book because you talk about very heavy and very complex situations. Like you're talking about starvation, you're talking about war, you're talking about love, talking about loss, so many different elements. And then in there is your experience,
Yeah.
through all of that as well, because you lost your mum, at a very young age. She was very young when she died. So can you
Yeah.
sort of tell us about, you did say you were writing this book for the next generation. But can you sort of tell us what drew you into this method, into, let's say, writing, into writing a book? Some people draw, some people podcast. So what drew you to specifically writing the book and writing it in a way of, I guess, like her perspective, not your perspective of her life?
Well, Ivana, ever since I was little, I was really interested in my mother's story, even when she was still with us. I was fascinated by the stories she told and the land she came from. And I always felt that it was a bit exotic, her life, in a good and bad way. Like she suffered, she went through a war. And so she experienced a lot of life in her short life. And I always wanted to write about her. I guess I was a reader growing up, and I read all the time. I'd never written a story, but I'm a big reader. So books to me, uh, I've always got books with me, and I love books. So it was always going to be a book. Um, then she passed when I was still young, and I was busy. And life is, you're busy being a mum, bringing up children. She lived around the corner from me, so I saw her every day. So it was really hard to have her not there, especially with little children. You need your mum, to help, to guide. And so it was only after my children were grown, they're in their 20s, 30s, that I finally got a little bit of time on my own, and I cut my work down. So I had a day off during the week. And in this time, I'd already been to Croatia quite a few times, and I'd forged connections with my aunties and my uncles and cousins. And I was gathering stories, just jotting them down. I used to have my little notebook with me when I was in Croatia. And my phone, I taped my aunt and uncle and cousins talking into the phone, just the stories. I had loads of stories. And then I thought, okay, this is it. I need to start writing. And I started writing just like a bit of a memoir sort of book. It was just because it was just for my family. It wasn't a book that ever was going to be published. It was going to be self-published, just like a book for my, maybe 100 or 200 books for my immediate family. And then I'd written 25,000 words, and one of my daughters, who's a bit of a writer herself, read it and said, "Mum, yeah, you've written it well." She said, "But you need to go back and write it like a story that anyone can pick up and read it, not people that know you. It's got to be like a book on a shelf, so it can appeal to anyone." And Ivana, I'd written 25,000 words. That was a lot of words. I wasn't very happy with her saying this, but I could see her point of view. And I thought, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I've got to make it a more generic book, but still get her message across. And I went back to the drawing board and I wrote a page. And the page I wrote was the page where she was on the boat leaving, which was going to be my original beginning, but it ended up being chapter 3 or 2, I think, or half of chapter 1, but it wasn't the beginning. And when I read that to my daughter, she said, "Yes, Mum, that's it. That's the way you write it. Write it through my mother's eyes," which wasn't easy because I needed to do a lot of research, because my mother had been gone for well over 20 years by then. So, so that was the way it was written. And and I'm so pleased I did, because it is a book that anyone can pick up. And I mean, and I've had people that aren't Croatian and have got no connection to Croatia picking it up and loving it as well. So
Oh,
I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of
oh, definitely. And I think it's such a good perspective too, because, when you said proxy brides, like at first that you spoke up, because I thought, oh, what's that? Like, it's not, because obviously where I grew up and how I grew up and how we transitioned our life to Australia was very different. So, similar but different, in so many ways. And I know there was a lot of proxy brides are coming from Italy, but I didn't hear it as such like a common thing from Croatia, but it was. So
it.
I love
Yeah.
that you bring that like educational element as well into that part of history. And because when we came to Australia, I was meeting people that had been there for like since they were young. And I
Mm.
thought, how did they get here? Why did they come to Australia? Like, I was like, we were coming up, my mum was already 40 when she came here. So obviously it was a different experience being a refugee through the war and then people coming prior to the war. So then I loved reading the book and sort of getting educated on that other layer. Yeah.
Well, well, there were two massive migration periods. So my father was he came over in the 1920s, and there was an aphid called phylloxera that ate that was very that ate the grapevines. And so the wine industry collapsed on my island. So there was a lot of immigration in the 1920s. And so he came as a child. He was a 4-year-old. He came as a child. But then in the 1950s was the next lot of immigration, and that was post-war. Post-World War II, there was a lot of immigration then. And I've talked to a lot of people since, and even in the 1960s, there was a lot of immigration as well.
Oh,
So
definitely. There's, you will find, our people everywhere because it's literally like it spans so many generations back, doesn't it?
yes, exactly. And for a lot of different reasons. And what I've found from researching in the book is just the pockets of where the migration happened. Like you'll find with my village, there's a lot of people there's about 4 different areas in Australia that they came to. They were very specific because they came where they had sponsors or where they knew people. So most of it was Far North Queensland was a big area. Sydney was a huge area, and I was very, very grateful. I had the Dalmatian Sydney Croatian Club did an event for me a couple of weeks ago down here. We were supposed to have it last year, but COVID stopped that. Um, so they did it a few weeks ago, and no kidding, this room now just about all from Blato.
Wow.
And normally when I have an event, I'll say I've had lots and lots of events in the last year, and I'll start off by saying, okay, who here has been to Croatia, to see a show of hands? I said, who here hasn't been to Croatia? And no hands went up. And most of these people, I met cousins that I didn't know, that I found through the book. They read the book and saw the family tree and reached out to me. They were my cousins. And then even on this event a few weeks ago, I met more second cousins. Um, I met the daughter of the proxy groom that was my mother's proxy groom was at this event.
Wow.
It was mind-blowing. But as I said, like the pockets that they came to, like Far North Queensland, Sydney, Perth, I found cousins in Perth through my book. And I think Broken Hill was another area that a lot of the Blato people went to as well to work. So it's quite interesting finding where the migration pockets happened.
Fascinating, bro. It's fascinating. I mean, even through the war that we went through, in the 90s, there was, millions of people displaced from that one, millions of us. So then you can think of the hundreds in that era when your dad left. Then also when your mum, like there was so many. I remember reading a particular story in your book, when your mum was getting on the boat and she asked, how many people is on the ship? And someone said about 800, hundreds. And you just think, being on this little tiny island and then everybody on that island, majority of everybody going on this boat and leaving. And they're not just leaving to like the nearest country. They're not leaving just somewhere in Europe. Like they're leaving to go to places like Australia, where at the time we were very deserted, very, not, I guess, not what it is now. And there were the farms, where there was no heritage, no culture, no nothing. And so they were having, even with her name, it was interesting when she was looking at her, I'm giving away a lot, but they're still going to have to read it and to thread it all together. But even when they changed her name from Marija with the J to dropping the J, Gavranich, dropping the ch and having the CH, it's like it changes your identity, changes your future, where you're going, who you've been. Like there's so many elements.
And they just did it because I recently got my citizenship. A couple of weeks ago, I got my papers, and I had to submit through my mother. I got Croatian citizenship, and I had to submit all these forms of hers. And at some of the forms, her name was Marija, and then all of a sudden it was Maria. And they said, "Do you have a form to show that she's changed the spelling of her name, that it's the same woman?" I said, "No," because they just did it. And
Like,
and they did it to assimilate, because otherwise people would have called her Marija.
yeah,
Was-
yeah,
And my grandfather just popped a H on the end of my surname, so I would be Gavranich, not Gavranich, to get
yeah,
it's just
yeah. It's all that thing that us foreigners have to do to assimilate to this. I can definitely relate to that. I honestly really can. And with your mother's story, so can you just give people a little bit of perspective as to, when she was born, also where Blato is in Croatia, so people know if they haven't been to that area geographically, and a little bit of background on what a proxy bride is, just so they get a concept around the book.
a lot of people don't know what a proxy bride is. Yes, both my parents were born from the same village, Blato, and it's in the middle of an island called Korčula. And Korčula is a very popular touristy island now. Its claim to fame is Marco Polo was born there. I think the Italians will probably disagree, but it's in between Split and Dubrovnik in the Adriatic Sea, and it's just a beautiful island. It's about 45 kilometres long and about 8 or 9 kilometres wide, and it's just beautiful. So as I said a little bit before, my father left when in the 1920s when he was a child. So, and he grew up in Mossman, which is Far North Queensland, near Cairns, on a sugarcane farm. My grandfather was initially a cane cutter and then bought property. Then my mother left this island after World War II, and she was, as Ivana said, a proxy bride. And a lot of people don't understand what that is. And I've been misquoted before saying that, "Oh, yes, it's an arranged marriage. The families get together and arrange it," but it wasn't. It's a proxy bride. All it means is that the groom is not at the wedding. Okay. So my father wrote over through my grandfather looking for someone, and through word of mouth, my mother was the one, and they corresponded with each other. They sent letters and they sent photos. And in my book, I've got the photos that they sent to each other. And they were beautiful looking people. And they wrote, and then he wanted to marry her, but because initially he wanted to bring her over, and the Italians did this. They would come over and live with the family, and if they got on, then yes, they would marry. But she wasn't allowed to leave Yugoslavia because it was a communist country. She had to be married to him because she had no family over there in Australia. She had no sponsors. So she had to be married to him to leave the country. And so they had what we call a proxy marriage, where his first cousin, a fellow called Kuzma Anic, stood in at the wedding. So they had a proper wedding in the island of Korčula. He sent over fabric, and the dressmaker, because there was nothing after the war, there was nothing left. The dressmaker made a beautiful dress, and the wedding photos is with my mother with a veil, a bouquet, a dress, and a man beside her who was not my father, this proxy groom. So it was my father's cousin. And it's a legally binding marriage. You don't have to have any more weddings after it. It's all legal in the eyes of the state. So she had this proxy marriage. And at that stage, because it was communist, they weren't allowed to have church weddings. And my mother's family was very Catholic, and her cousin was even the parish priest there, but they weren't allowed to have a church wedding. But there's I won't give any spoilers. You'll have to read the book what happens.
Oh, definitely. And honestly, when I looked through the photos, I thought to myself, they had so little, and there was such little food and there was so much scarcity and everything, but they still looked so beautiful and they were always dressed well. And you think to yourself, look at me, I'm like in my like jinky, cool whinging, like life's so busy. And then you see them and all the hardships that generation had to endure. Like it was literally your uncle in the book, from me gathering, like he was born into war and he had never known a life outside of war.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And then he went through the Homeland War as well. He lost a lot of friends in the Homeland War when he was on the mainland in Metkovich as well.
I mean, and you just wonder, like, how did these people and these generations, how with little, psychological help, there was no, mental health, are you okay day, psychologist, there was no mental help. And you think, how on earth, like I even look at us, I mean, look, we didn't come out unscathed. When you sort of look at the whole picture, there is still repercussions of all of it as you grow up. You start to see it, because they say that all the trauma and wounding, it goes 7 generations back. So it affects you even if you didn't go through it, but you still feel it on your skin. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with your mum, when you guys were growing up, and was she sort of very open in sharing her story? Was she very open, or did she keep things to herself?
Yep. Well, I was the youngest of 4 children, so I probably heard the less. She could never watch a war movie. She didn't talk much about the war, but she did tell us stories, especially of the starvation. We all knew that she ate grass soup because there was no food, and the story of the almond tree, which is in the book. We knew they were very, very, very hungry. And one of the women I met in Sydney said that what I portrayed the 2 emotions of the war was very accurate, was fear and hunger. Yes, sort of fear and a little bit of hunger. Um, but she told my older siblings knew some more of the stories of the war, but generally she she was a woman that didn't dwell on the past. She was really grateful to be in Australia, and she could help her family a lot. She used to send money and parcels back to her family, and she was just very, very, very grateful. And yeah, my dad was such a good man, and so she was very. I think she felt she was really lucky to have not only scored a good husband, but scored a husband, but scored. She scored a husband that was willing to help her family, and
Mm.
so that she could always be helping her family. So I think yeah, no, she didn't dwell on the past. I did an interview in Brisbane, it was a live interview, and at the end of the interview, they asked me, which was quite tricky. They asked me to summarize my book in one word, and I think it summarized my mother. And I said it was a story of hope.
Mm.
That's what I think it was. And that's what my publisher said afterwards when she heard the interview. She goes, "Yep, you got that. That's right." And
Mm.
and the other thing, there was this is a funny story. One of my editors is in Sydney, and she said she just finished reading my book, and she was sitting in Double Bay in Sydney, which apparently is a very posh suburb, and she was meditating and thinking about my mother's story. And a gentleman came and sat next to her at the table, and the young waitress when delivered the coffee and spilt a little bit, and he just got so angry at her and went on and on. And she said she felt like leaning over and saying, "You're complaining about a spilt coffee. You should read this story and see what this young woman went through and how resilient and how grateful she was." And I always think of that story.
And if she continues to, when you think about it, you have in a way immortalized her through this book, where she'll always live on in all of your memories, obviously, in all of the children's memories. But in a way, now you've captured her in a way where she's become limitless, and
Yes.
it's like you've given her the recognition and the love and everything. Like, sometimes we can do that better when someone has passed than what we can when they're living.
Yeah, and it's so true because it's been over 26 years now since she's passed, and all my family are grateful to me because we're all talking about mum and dad now, and a lot of other people are telling us stories about our parents, and they're it's almost like they're back with us because it's been a year now since my book was published, and my journey is still going. Like, I have many, many events still happening with this story. And I've been to writers' panels, and I've got 5 events in Brisbane next month, at the end of the month. and I'm going to New Zealand. It's all these little events, and at every event, I'm talking about my parents. My husband had a coffee with one of his friends last week, and she said, does Deb get a bit tired of just going over the same thing again and again? And he said no, and it is lovely because I'm so proud of who my parents were and what good people they were and the lives they touched, and it's just wonderful. And I'm getting better about being less emotional. I have to admit, Ivana, the first probably few months that I would talk about Mum, I would cry getting up and talking. It was very emotional to actually talk about her because, I'm choking up now talking about her because she was so good, and she passed so young as
Yeah.
well. We were denied, so my children were denied so much. That's probably who I feel for, that they didn't have her love there.
Oh, 100%. And it's one of those things that, your mum took on this massive risk. And she took on this massive, like people can't even encompass it, right? You could never repeat that ever again, in that time, because that will most likely never occur, hopefully never. It is occurring in other places in the world, but in a different way. Um, so what happened, the sort of domino effect from her massive leap in space. So leaving everything behind, like she traveled to give people perspective. She was coming from this tiny little island that had been plagued by war for so many years, where she was raising her younger siblings, where there was starvation, fear, hunger, scarcity, or so many things, right? She's a young girl herself, and she's taking on the role of being a little mom, a cook, all these things. Then it's like she's literally embarking on this journey of marrying this, stand-in husband, and going to Australia, which, it wasn't a cool place. It wasn't like how it is now. Like, I'm going to come to Australia for a year, see if I like it.
Work.
And she went through Egypt, like, to give people perspective. She went through Geneva. She went through, sorry, she went through Geneva. She went through different parts of Italy, even to Este, where my husband's family's from. Egypt, like, amazing. Like, when you just try and mentally grasp everything, you think, how on earth did she keep it together? And then you see how strong her faith was, her faith in God, her faith in her family, in herself, faith within herself also, because when you speak with God or you speak with that outer source, you're also speaking with yourself. It's that reflection to self, and then coming here and having faith that, he's going to be a nice guy, a nice husband. And there's also stories, where she's on the boat, where she was, with another proxy bride who was coming to Australia because she was traveling. Your mum was traveling with some family of friends who had children. So she wasn't completely by herself. And, the girl she was traveling with, and she ended up actually committing suicide. I think you were saying in the last podcast you did. So have you sort of read other proxy bride experiences from Croatia that didn't end well?
Yeah, no. She was very lucky in a lot of ways that my dad was such a good man. And I think, yeah, not all the stories turned out well. A lot of the stories didn't turn out well. So, but she was she had no choice. Like, she agreed to this.
Yeah.
And regardless of who was waiting at the other end, there was no turning back. My original title for my book was going to be One Way Ticket. I ended up left because it was a one-way ticket. Just, she would, not only did she have not money to go back, but it would bring shame on the family if she went back. So she had to make it work. She absolutely had to make it work. And her growing up, I always remember her saying, "Love grows," and that was and so because Dad was a complete stranger, but they were good people, and I'm just very grateful to have been born into this family. And the book really does tell the story um, of of how she was a new migrant. But a lot of people have been asking me if I'm going to write another book because they enjoyed this book so much. And a lot of people have said I should write a book about my dad and and because he was such a good bloke, and call it The Boy Who Waited, which I think is pretty funny.
Oh, that it like even, the letters they wrote to each other, that made me laugh, because you did put a bit of that in the book, which I thought was really awesome. It was a nice little touch as well, because like the book has got so many, ups and downs, and then it's like you got laughter, and then you got tears, and you got, so many varying emotions. And
That's right.
what
Yeah.
really stuck out me,
Add the funny bits as well. It's not
yeah,
it? Yeah.
definitely. And it gives that sort of, I guess it gives that uplifting, to such heavy, heavy, dark times. And one thing that stood out to me, because as I was reading her story, I saw so much of my own story in there. And I just thought, wow, like, because you often don't stop and reflect on your own story, So I guess part of me wanting to write a book for sort of for my family as well, it's for that next generation. And it makes me think, how did she get through all these hard times, But then you think, they didn't have anything, but they had each other, and that's
Yeah.
what we had when we go through tough times. And on page 18, in a chapter called "The Village Changed," it says here, uh, you know, it really struck me because she had sisters and a brother, and her little sister said to her, "Marija, I'm scared." And then she says to her sister, "Me too, Juva." She grasped her little sister's hand and said, "It's all right. We have each other and I'll look after you, I promise." The girls snuggled close under the blanket in the bed they shared, their feet intertwined to keep warm, and their 2-year-old brother, Ivan, had a mattress on the floor between the bed. And that just like that one sort of paragraph that's there, it reminded me of us when we were in our beds. We didn't have much space. We didn't, and we used to, because there wasn't much food in the time of the war, and we were really hungry, and we didn't have like electricity, and there was like a rat in this house we were in, and all we had was each other, and we used to lay there with mum and just hug each other. And we used to just talk about, like, when we got out, all the good things we would do and all the things we would eat. And and it just, like, that's what kept you alive. That sort of hope that you're gonna overcome this, and that if you stick together, you're gonna be all right, So it forms these really deep and meaningful relationships, and I think that's just what shapes you into who you are, and then into type of the mother you are to your children one day. Because obviously your family is very close, and your mum and dad had everything to do with that.
Oh, and we are so lucky because that's what I say with my siblings. Our parents instilled such a love of each other in the family. It was family. Your family meant everything, and I know you're like that as well, Ivana. That like I would do anything for my family, and when I get so upset if families don't get on, it's so important for families, I think, and and I think because my mother didn't have a family here, we were family because she'd left the family.
Oh, yeah.
We
Oh, see her story, like, even on I'm gonna go to page 47, which honestly, I marked so many things in this book, like, I need 50 hours to get through it. But it was the full latte. So obviously it follows your mum's journey from, when she was small to her life in Australia. And one particular one that stood out was, it said it was 30th of November 1943, and it says the Nazis were here. She watched in horror as the fighter planes turned and thundered back, releasing bombs on unsuspecting seaside town of Korčula. Bomb after bomb whistled through the air. Although she was kilometers away in the center of the island, she could feel the earth rumble as the bombs found their targets. Imagining the screams of the children, she cries of their mothers' boats sinking and houses collapsing. Terrified, some of the besieged locals fled to the islands of Bis and Hwar on boats provided by the British. Marija heard the destination was El Shat, the refugee camp in Egypt. Others dashed inland, some come to hide in Plateau. And you just think, wow, like, so many people refuged to so many different places. I mean, I didn't even know. Yeah, like, I didn't even know that there was, Croatian people living in Egypt.
Yes, yeah. And
I
a lot of
know.
been contacted by them since my book's been out. I have quite a few people have contacted me that they grew up in the refugee camps in Al Shat before they came to Australia.
I
So
fascinating. That was very educational for me, because that's obviously something that I never really, no one ever told me, or I never really sort of looked into, because it was before my time.
I
Um,
didn't know it either until I did all the research as well. So I did a lot of historical research, and yeah, there was a big refugee camp of Croatia, well, Yugoslavians in Egypt.
oh, And well, in 1944, there's a chapter, it says retribution, because obviously it takes you through all the different sort of elements of the different wars that were coming to the area. And one that really my heart sort of sank was one particular one on page 56. It said 2 young men and a girl barely emerged from their hiding place amongst the trees. But as though they shouted again, urging Pavel and Maria to move quickly. Pavel helped carry the bodies to the truck. Marija collected the weapons from where they had fallen and handed them to the young woman, who accepted them without uttering a word. Marija recognized her. She had been a few years older than Marija at school. She looked thinner now, but stronger. She half smiled and nodded at Marija before turning to join her comrades. The Partisans disappeared with the truck and the bodies melting back in their heels. Frantically, Pavel kicked at the soil and rocks to conceal the blood-stained ground. Marija stood still, trying to process what she had just seen, more death. And
Well,
wow.
actually, my I didn't know that story, but my mother had told my brother that story. So
Wow.
that's what would happen is they would yell out in Croatian for the workers to duck, and then they'd shoot the Germans. So yeah, no. So these things did happen, and that is, my book is 95% fact.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
it's
You can't tell the story without telling the whole story, right? So, for whoever's going to have a problem with, you naming certain things, or you calling the language Yugoslavian, or you calling it like referencing Yugoslavia, like that's what it was then.
was you, and that's why we did the disclaimer at the beginning, because during that time it was known as Yugoslavia. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was the correct
And
title.
so many, yeah, yeah, exactly. And so many people get their knickers in a twist about, history and being on the right side of history and everything. And, you said as well when we met up, like, this book is not it's not meant to be about politics. It's about my mother's story. And in order to help us to tell a story, I have to reference, what happened in history. Um, and
Yeah.
I think it was, you done it so beautifully. Um, and I have to reference another, because this is the page 100, and it was in 1952, where it says goodbye Blato. I have to read some excerpts because I want to give people perspective on how much she put into this. And he said on here, sitting on the bed, she took the time to survey her bedroom, your mum, the room she shared with her siblings. She had lived in this old stone house her entire life. It was basic but strong. Despite them now living in a communist country, religion was still very important in this house. Holy pictures hung from the walls alongside framed photos of Tito. The room smelt of smoke, sweetened by the fragrance of drying grapes and plums. She thought about what awaited her. It would be a long trip, and now it was time to go. Nothing waited for her here. I was like, oh my God, I felt like I was in that bedroom with her. Like, I'm sitting there and I'm next to, like, that. Honestly, it's like you just, because I was such a visual person. And then the way you just described it all, the way you wrote it, was the writing process quite natural for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because my eldest sister is a retired high school English teacher, and when she read the book, she said, "You show, you don't tell," which is, and a few other teachers have said that to me, that I actually use all the senses, the visual, and it just came naturally, which is I'm pleased because yeah, I know I could write, and obviously I can, but I don't want to write any more books. I've done what I wanted to do, but I'm really pleased. I'm really pleased the way it turned out, and that it's so easy to read, and it is so visual. And Ivana, I've had some older Croatian people where English isn't their first language, have said they found it really easy to read, which makes me really happy as well.
Oh,
And
and once it gets translated into Croatian, I think you'll make you even happier as well.
that's my big dream, where my international agent, my publisher's international agent, is still knocking on doors in Croatia to try and get a Croatian publisher, because we need to have a publisher over there come on board. So a lot of people have been trying to help me. So fingers crossed that that will happen, because Ivana, some of the characters in my book, for example, my aunt and my uncle can't speak English, can't read English. So they can't read the book, which is really sad. So we really want a Croatian publisher to be on board, which would be absolutely wonderful.
Oh, look, and that's the awesome thing about, podcasts and connecting with others that, you never know who's going to hear this, and who's going to have those right connections, and we know how much that means. And as well, because like I just loved it and I was literally going through marking so many things. The way it sort of encapsulated for me was on page 217. It says a new life in Cairns. So obviously I've skipped over a lot from where it started to now because people have to read it. It said about your mum and dad. They sat content in their silence, waving at neighbours and watching the sunset. The mouth-watering smell of spaghetti sauce simmering on the stove wafted out. Their eyes met over the glasses as they clinked them and said jovially. And I just thought, wow, like it's sort of like the perfect summary to how they lived, and, how they grew to love each other. And what I love is the fact that, your dad, he took her on a honeymoon when she got there, to see if she liked him or not. And, he said, if you don't like me, it's okay. We don't have to get married. And, and it worked out for both of them.
He was such a good bloke. Yeah, my dad was he never had any enemies. And, anyone that remembers my dad and my mum said, how good they were. And, I'm so proud of them. I'm so proud of them.
And the best part is when you're, so, I'm skipping ahead a bit, where you actually traveling to Croatia. We traveled to Europe when you were younger. I think you were only 20. And you were telling your mum that you wanted to have a return trip, and your mum's reaction, you said, okay, family, I'm going overseas backpacking through Europe and I really want to visit your family, mum. And she said to you, well, that's lovely, darling. And as supportive as always. But if you visit my family in your little short shorts and backpack, you look like hippie. I just love talking about I just love that because it's such a long thing. Like I can just
You don't put shame on the family. Oh my God.
She said, there'll be talk. I don't want you to look like hobo. Oh, like a poor person, Just,
Oh, and it was so true. I mean, I had to buy this backpack that I could zip into a suitcase, and I had to pay high heels and I mean, I tossed all the clothes once I left Croatia because I didn't have any room, and we'd just come from Greece. And so it was hot. And here I am dressing up and putting makeup on, and it was hilarious. But
Michael, and I love the photos that are in there of that too, like of your time then. Like there was, because your mum went back a couple of times, right? And one of the times that she went, her brother picked her up and he said to her, this is page 229, family reunion. He said, this war has been difficult, Before the war, everyone was the same. But when the war started, people began asking, who are you? It was not good. Marija nodded. She knew too well the tremors of distrust that had always rumbled beneath the surface, a constant warning of the earthquake that could break apart a country, communities, and families. Opening up old wounds, she said, so sad, so much suffering. Yes, so many stories of neighbors turning on neighbors. His shoulders sagged a little more. And honestly, like when I read these things, Debra, I just it hits so deep because I think at the end of everything, I think why?
yeah,
What was the point of all this suffering? What was the point of all this separation? What was, you just think why, because often I wonder what my life would have looked like had I had had the chance to stay where I was born, and obviously you wouldn't be where you are now and your life wouldn't be the way it is now. So I'm grateful for that. But at the same time, I sort of semi-envy, other people that have been able to be born in the same place, go to their local school, have the same friends for 30 years. And I just think, wow, that will never be my story or your mum's story. So much hardship was endured and you just sort of think why?
and that's why you have to write your story, Ivana. I think your story is so important. You're
I-
the narrator.
I'm going to do too much crying.
I know you can cry while you write.
Did you cry much when you were writing, Debra?
No, not at all. It's interesting. I found it really cathartic. And even, I won't give away too much, but the postscript is my point of view, where talking about how I felt losing my mum. And I found it very cathartic to write about how she died, how she passed, and that that was really important to me. But it's funny because I would read my chapters, every chapter I wrote, my husband would sit in the what we call the listening chair, and I'd turn around and say, "How's that?" And he'd just have tears streaming down his face, and people reading it. Like, I just got a message yesterday. There's someone who's just said they cried, they laughed, they had the tissues with them in their bed all weekend. Like, I cried, as I said, talking about this book and talking about my mum to people, but writing it, no, not a tear, not a tear.
And I love that you say as well at the end, where you were talking to your family members and friends who would remember her when she passed, because your son was only very young, like I think 2 years old when she passed. So,
Yep.
what
My
else?
baby was 4 months old. I had a
Oh, and even for you, as a daughter, losing your mum at that age when you need her the most, that would have just been devastating. That's a whole other episode in itself. But you
Oh,
basically stand Mama's friend Anne delivered the eulogy, telling a tale of a woman, a new migrant in this country, a brave young woman. She told of the hardships that our mother had endured silently. And it says, you wrote, the altar was crowded with priests, not one but seven, as if assisting the occupant of the coffin on her final journey. If there was one thing we were all sure of, it was that she had never feared death. She loved her God and believed he would take her soul on a long journey one more time to join her husband. This time her husband awaited her, not in Australia, but in heaven. She truly believed this. She needed no help on this journey. This was my mother, Marija Gavranich. She was already a saint to so many on this earth.
yeah,
And that was like
yeah,
stories from the grandkids, like
yeah,
so many similarities even with my grandparents that we used to watch like so many funny shows. And then, it's got on there from all the grandkids, which I love. You said memories from Maria's grandchildren, which is at the end.
I,
Making pronunciation.
yeah. No, I not all of them wrote, but the ones that remember, like my children, obviously were too small, but I have nieces and nephews that are a lot older, and it was lovely to give them the opportunity to put down in words their memories of my mum, which and they were a lot of funny stories. Yeah, she loved her grandchildren.
It's like, they're saying her pronunciation of some words, her love of bread and its aroma, which I love bread too. So that would explain a lot, maybe because we're always so hungry. It said her warm, wholehearted hugs and affection, the laughs. And then also it says here, hearing true stories about growing up through World War II, which had always had my brother Adam and sister Melissa and I captivated and eager to hear more about a place and life experience that was far removed from the freedoms and comforts of growing up within baby hides, cans. Stories of eating grass and anything that was edible and having to collect these sources of food under the threat of watchful enemy soldiers just always stayed with me. And it's like the things that you're able to now, give your children is just fascinating. And it says here from Melissa Gregory, who was the fifth grandchild, it says Marija Gavranich, better known to us, her grandchildren as Little Lana, was an amazing woman who lived her life with gratitude and grace and was unapologetically herself, um, which is just amazing. And it says here from Elizabeth, the seventh grandchild, it says, from everything I have heard and the respect with others around me holds for her, I'm sad to have not had the chance to know my Nana. Even not knowing her all that well, I still feel a deep sense of loss at not having her in my life. I hope this book will give me a connection to the wonderful lady that she was and always will be, Maria, my beloved Nana. And I mean, that just completes everything because even for all the grandkids and grandkids who are going to come in the future, they're now going to have this book of their family history. It's like, you must be so proud of that.
Yeah, and it is. I am absolutely, because I've been just the feedback from like the family have been have been so excited to have this book that and now they've heard, just for them to know all these stories, and they feel like they know her, and it will be passed on. And it's not just my children or my nieces and nephews, it's my cousin's kids and my second cousin's kids. And it's this huge family, extended family, that have got this record. And that's when I went to the Sydney event a couple of weeks ago. it was just such a wonderful event. The room was just full of love and laughter, and they were all so grateful to me. They said, "Look, this story represents their stories, and there's no book out there like this." And just so happy that I've written it, and I'm so grateful that the diaspora have received it so well. It's just been.
Look, it's definitely what's needed because, our stories are so important. Bringing these stories to light and paying tribute to, what was, what is, and what's to come, threading all those pieces together. It's so important to sort of vocalize it all because you think of the suffering and the pain and everything they all went through. For us now to have the opportunity to, be vocal and write our stories and sharing our creativity, like it's a gift, they came, here so we could have these better lives. So I just think, what you've done is beautiful and amazing. And what is your biggest takeaway from, I always say, what is your biggest fear and have you overcome it? And the reason why I say that is obviously because your mum had a lot of fears and she just jumped right through them. So, is there any big fears that you have? Do you have a big fear and have you overcome it?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I'm pleased you've asked that, Ivana, because like my life has been charmed compared to what my mother went through. I'm very grateful for my life, but one of my biggest fears was when I was writing this book. Believe it or not, I had two fears writing this book. One of them was that I wouldn't do my mother justice. She was such an amazing woman. I was really frightened that writing this story, I wouldn't portray her as she was. And the second fear was that I wasn't a good enough writer to put it in words so that the book wasn't going to be a very good book. And I have just been so happy that I overcame it, obviously, because I was able to do it. And the response to the book has just been overwhelming and really humbling. And obviously, the book is well written, and I can say that really proudly now because so many people that aren't connected to me have said it is a really well written book. You've written it so well, and so, as you say, so visual. And also, so many people have said, "Oh, you've portrayed your mother exactly as she was," and she was a beautiful person, and not just my mother, but my father. So, yeah, they were two of my fears that writing this book. It was quite brave because a lot of the characters are still alive. And so that in itself is really frightening that you want to do it correctly and you want to do it historically accurately as well. But you want to portray it truthfully, but obviously I want the characters to like the book the way I've written it as
And
well.
what advice would you have to, other women who are listening to this podcast, who might have fears around, birthing a new creation of whatever sort, it could be a book, it could be a podcast, could be, painting, could be anything, obviously us women, we tend to put ourselves last and, especially with families. So sort of what's one piece of advice that you would give them to just go for it?
And I think I wish I could have talked to a younger me. I would say be kind to yourself is probably the best. Don't be hard on yourself. Be kind to yourself and believe in yourself, I think.
And
But mainly be kind. Be kind to yourself.
oh, and I love that. I think that's great advice because that's what this podcast is all about. It's about being kind to yourself and being kind to others. And I think we've done that today. And Deborah, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on board and being my guest today. And I hope that whoever's listening, all around the world, I hope they get some valuable insights out of it and maybe apply one or two things, because obviously even when we read a book, we can see a lot in ourselves through these books we read. And then you also apply some of that courage and some of that bravery to your everyday life as well. So I want to say thank you for writing your story so nicely, your mum's story, your family history. And it's been a privilege getting to know you. And I hope that, the guests love it too.
Thank you for having me, Ivana.
Oh, wow, ladies. So I got really, really carried away. Deborah and I didn't even give you all the relevant links for her book. So the book was published by Wild Dingo Press at www.wilddingopress.com.au. You can purchase the book on there. You can purchase it anywhere online, any websites like Booktopia or Anywhere else, if you type it into Google, it will pop up if you're not in Australia. Obviously, all the leading bookstores, local libraries. She's active on social media, Facebook, Instagram, email. So I highly recommend that you connect with her, you follow her, and read her beautiful story and her family heritage. Always love supporting women in business and women in creativity. And I'm glad I was able to do that today. So thank you for being here with us.
So that was the episode. I hope that you really enjoyed it. And as ever, if you did, please consider sharing it with your loved ones and leaving me a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. It really does make a difference to the number of Balkan sisters that we can reach with the brilliant wisdom that my guests and I share. Thanks for being here. I doviđenja.